A new era declared for the Liberals as the Prime Minister heads to Indonesia. I'm Olivia Caisley, live from the lands of the Ngunnawal people. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. A new leader for a coalition in need of a reset. But can Sussan Ley unite a divided team and start rebuilding trust with voters? Liberal Senator Anne Ruston joins us in just a moment. As Labor ramps up its climate ambitions, the coalition is still reviewing its commitments. They say they want to win back inner city electorates, but can they do that with a climate policy stuck in neutral? I'll put that to our political panel, Nationals Senator Bridget McKenzie and Labor MP Marielle Smith. And Anthony Albanese heads to Indonesia for a meeting with President Prabowo Subianto in his first international trip since being re-elected. Less than 24 hours since Sussan Ley was elected the Liberal Party's first female leader, the party's Vice President, Fiona Scott, has walked back comments questioning how long Ley would last.
How long do you give her?
I don't know. I mean, a day's a long time in politics, Carl, so...
That's not exactly a ringing endorsement.
Not much confidence there.
Well, you know, it could be a day. It won't be a day, I'm being cheeky. But, I mean, look, you don't know what the political tides will bring. That was just a bit of a joke at the time, but no, I did go on to clarify that I absolutely support Sussan. I think it's a wonderful step forward.
Rebuild, rebrand and recover. That's the challenge now facing the coalition as Sussan Ley takes the reins after a crushing defeat. But can she unite a fractured party and chart a path forward? I spoke with one of her backers, Liberal Senator Anne Ruston, earlier. Anne Ruston, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with Sussan Ley. Are you pleased she won the leadership ballot?
Look, I think Sussan's leadership going forward is a wonderful opportunity for us. I mean, she's an extremely capable politician. She's got a lot of experience both in the parliament and in the real world, having had a series of really quite extraordinarily diverse jobs. So I'm very excited about the opportunity that the reset gave us yesterday to move forward and rebuild.
I've heard you were instrumental in locking down some of the swing voters for Ley. In your mind, why is she the right person to lead the coalition through this period of what will be one of rehabilitation and regeneration, I guess, after the resounding loss?
Well, look, I mean, obviously everybody's vote is their own vote and that is a matter for the party room. But I think it's really exciting that we've got a new leadership team and obviously congratulate Ted O'Brien also becoming the deputy leader because between the two of them plus Michaela Cash and myself who remain in the leadership positions in the Senate, I think we've got a really interesting and diverse team from a range of different backgrounds and different experiences. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity and the challenge to rebuild after what was, without putting too fine a point on it, a very devastating loss at the last election. We've got a lot of work to do and I'm really looking forward to doing it.
Can you explain to viewers what the mood's like within the party at the moment following that loss? I mean, ultimately within the moderates, is there a sense of despair about the results that we saw on election night?
Well, look, I think we all need to take a very, analytical look at what happened on the election and the lead up to the election, because you only learn and are able to make change, positive change, to move forward by reflecting on what went wrong. So I think we're all very realistic about the fact that the election result was a very bad result for the Liberal Party. But the opportunity that we have looking forward, I mean, I've always been one of those people that, I mean, sure, you've got to have one foot in the current so that you can actually see what's happening at the moment, but you always have to have an eye to the future. And I'm very focused on the future of our party and making sure that the offering we take to the next election is an offering that the Australian public are going to consider as a really solid alternative to the current government. Because the reality is the challenges of the last 3 years, the cost of living and many of the other challenges that we've seen in terms of our international security and the like have not gone away. And what we've got to do is to build a new platform to make sure that we are a very strong alternative to the Australian public at the next election.
Well, in the lead up to the election, I was speaking with the senior Liberal sources and they were already warning that female voters were walking away. That started under Scott Morrison, but they told me that they saw a bit of a drop-off after the Trump inauguration, for example. It continued again with the working from home policy backflip. When it comes to appealing to this section of voters, female voters who have been turning away from the party, where do you stand on quotas? Is it time to stop debating the principle and just act on this to improve female representation in the party?
Well, look, I think we have to look at everything in terms of what Australians said at the ballot box at the election last week, whether that be women voters, whether that be young voters, whether that be our multicultural communities, whether it people in rural and regional Australia, people in metropolitan areas, and understand what it was that they didn't like about the offering that we were putting to the Australian public. And so we need to be really analytical, but we also need to be really honest with ourselves about what went wrong so that we can make positive changes so that into the future we do provide an offering that Australians want. And I think one of those things is making sure that the representation in our party is reflective of what people want to vote for. And so there's a lot of work to be done. I don't want to preempt what that review might look like, but I do think we have to be very, very honest about what went wrong, because unless we're honest with ourselves about what went wrong, it's very difficult to make the changes we need so that we've got a positive alternative into the future.
So just to drill down on that slightly, in your mind, are quotas, they're not off the table?
Well, I've always been of the belief that you should pick the best person for the job, and I've never been a great supporter of quotas, but I do believe that you have to take affirmative action to make sure that you have got representation, and that includes making sure that you've got the pipelines of people. I mean, we've got a couple of fantastic new young women coming into the parliament, and unfortunately we had a bad result, but had we had a reasonable result, there would have been a lot more fantastic young women coming into our parliament. And I want to make it one of my roles going forward is to make sure that we are supporting young women so that they are joining our party. But I also want to support all young people because they are the future of the party, and I think for people like me who've been there for some time, part of our role must be to mentor and support young people so that they are able to make their way to replace those of us who won't be there, some years into the future.
When some of the chatter really this week has been that it might be time for the coalition to take a break, that being the Liberals and the Nationals, and that's because some of the Nationals' policies, for example, are particularly toxic in the cities, especially the attitudes towards the environment, that kind of thing. Do you think that the partnership is still serving the Liberal Party?
Look, I think that the strength of the coalition over the years has been the fact that we have been able to work together whilst understanding and accepting and respecting that there are some differences in some policy positions between the two parties, and we come together and we work together in what we think is in the best interests of the people we represent, and they're people that live in rural, regional, remote Australia and people who live in the cities as well, and I think that is the strength, and I think there's a very positive future, and there will be a future of the coalition going forward because, as I say, we work best when we work together, and that certainly will be something that I'll be seeking to work towards as part of that leadership team to maintain that really strong relationship with our brothers and sisters in the National Party.
And where do you stand on net zero by 2050? Do you think that commitment needs to be up for review again?
Look, I think the most important thing that we must be focusing on as a nation is about making sure that we've got affordable, reliable power and that we're delivering a clean energy future that I think Australians want into the future. But right now, the most critical issue that needs to be resolved by the current government, and something that they've failed to do over the last 3 years, is actually to have a situation where people don't just constantly see their energy bills going up and up and up to the extent that they can't afford to pay for them. That is the issue when it comes to energy policy that must be resolved. Is people need to have energy bills that they can afford to pay for. Otherwise, not is it just impacting on households, but we're offshoring manufacturing because Australian manufacturing can't afford to be here because of energy costs. So I think there is a very, very serious issue that is right before us now, and that's affordable, reliable power.
The environment is just one example. So leaving the door open, for example, to changing the commitment to reaching net zero by 2050. But how are you going to try and win back voters who are under the age of 50 who already see the coalition as stuck in the past?
Well, I think this is part of the review that we have to undertake over the coming weeks, is around understanding what it is that the Australian public are asking for from their alternative government. I mean, the strength of a democracy is making sure that your opposition is as strong as your government, and we need to be able to build a policy platform that speaks to the issues that Australians think are important and provides solutions to the issues that Australians think are important going forward. So I think it's that is the most important thing that we can be doing as the Liberal Party and as a coalition over the coming weeks, is making sure that we understand that and provide a policy platform to the next election that Australians believe responds to the things that they think are important.
And when it comes to that policy platform more generally, do you think that the party needs to shift back to the centre to win? What's your view on that?
Well, I think we need to reflect what the Australian public want from their alternative government and hopefully their government into the future. We need to listen to what people are saying. We should never move away from our core values. You know, we are a centre-right party, and that's what we should be continuing to do with the set of values that we hold. But we also need to understand that the Australian public have got issues that are important to them and they want them solved in a particular way. And so we need to make sure that what we're offering the Australian public, that the Australian public sees as a solution to the challenges that they face in their everyday lives, whether that be households or businesses or communities or you know, whoever it may be. Our offering has to reflect what they want, because otherwise they won't buy it.
We saw Jacinta Price moving from the Nationals to the Liberals. Would you like to see her given a prominent front bench role, or should others who've been in the Liberal Party for longer be given priority?
Well, look, obviously, we're delighted to welcome anybody into our party room that holds Liberal values, and it was nice to welcome Jacinta into the party room for the first time yesterday. She's made a significant contribution in her time in the National Party, and I look forward to working with Jacinta into the future.
And just lastly, Anne, where in your view did the coalition go wrong? Do you have a specific example of you see as the major problem for the party at the election?
Well, what I think is the most important thing is that we don't actually, speculate about what went wrong at the election, that we actually go out there and find out the facts, speak to the people, get the feedback that we need, and accept that there probably were a number of things that contributed to what happened Saturday week ago. I'm sure every one of us could probably speculate about what may have been right and what may have been wrong, but I don't think anything's served by that. I think the most important thing is that we look at everything and we look at it in an analytical and independent way, so that we actually make sure that we actually are addressing all of the issues.
I appreciate that, but when you were out on the hustings though, is there a particular policy that you were getting negative feedback on, for example, that you think did play a role in the election loss?
The interesting thing about being on the election campaign was different things were raised in different areas across the whole of the nation, and there were many and varied. And so that's why I think that there's no purpose served by saying, there was one thing that was more prominent than the other. I think we have to actually go out there and be independent, be analytical, use all the tools that are available to us. And I mean, AI is a wonderful opportunity for us to actually get a much broader scope of what people were thinking, so that when we do make those decisions about the changes that we need to make, that they are informed by a really broad piece of data and not individual speculation.
Senator Ruston, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Social media content creators and their role in politics was in the spotlight ahead of the federal election when some were invited by Labor into the budget lockup at Parliament House. During the campaign, podcast content shared by Abby Chatfield was investigated and cleared by the Australian Electoral Commission, while independent MP Allegra Spender admitted to paying an agency to commission favourable social media posts. Hannah Ferguson interviewed both Adam Bandt and Anthony Albanese on her podcast Big Small Talk during the campaign, and at the National Press Club today laid out her decision to run for the Senate as an independent in the next election. She said women wanted an alternative, both in the media and the Parliament.
Part of the reason I'm so desperate to do it is because I've spent 4 years now on the outside talking about politicians and criticising and offering support, but constantly negotiating my progressive line and where my boundaries and personal values lie. And that is all well and good, but I also want to step into the arena and actually understand and challenge that system, because I think that's the next point of affecting change for me ultimately. But running a campaign and losing, I think, is also a powerful thing to do to show other young women that they can do the same thing and that it's not embarrassing. It's actually a triumph that you attempted to challenge a system and an establishment.
Triple J Hack's political reporter Shalila Medora was at the National Press Club for Hannah Ferguson's speech today, and she joins us now. It sounds like a pretty interesting speech. Hannah said that legacy media and indeed legacy political parties aren't really meeting the needs of younger Australians. What do you make of that? Does she have a point?
I think if you look at her following, she's clearly tapped into something. She's got about 4 million, an online audience of about 4 million during the last election campaign. So she's clearly tapping into something that people want to consume. I think her major point is that in Australia at the moment, we have really highly concentrated media, and that tends to be concentrated towards right-wing establishment kind of, systems. And her argument is the reason that influencers, though she doesn't really like the word influencers, she prefers to be called a commentator. The reason commentators like her are so popular is because there hasn't been a left-wing alternative in the media. So she says that the reason progressive voices have come to the fore during this election campaign is because legacy media isn't keeping up with those views.
It's interesting, you said there, she had an issue perhaps with the language or the definition around that role that she plays within the broader media landscape. Where does she think that she sits in that broader, I guess, her position there?
Yeah, she said very clearly that she doesn't believe herself to be a journalist, which I thought was really interesting because obviously the line can be really blurred if you're an audience member who doesn't realise, like you and I, for example, working at the ABC, we have to adhere to a set of rules as journalists. But commentators and influencers, if you want to use that word, they don't have the same sort of regulation around them, or they don't have the same code of conduct or whatever it might be. She actually said during her speech that she would welcome increased regulation and a sort of code of conduct for online commentators. So things like, for example, if they were being sponsored by a political party, if they were being sponsored by lobby groups, then that would be plain and transparent, and that they would have to adhere to a code of conduct similar to the way journalists do the work that we do. I thought that was the most interesting aspect of her speech, that she actually said there needs to be greater regulation around what people consume so it's really transparent.
Okay, and so on that point about paid content, did she have a view on that? Did she think that that needed to be regulated specifically? I mean, that did come up as an issue over the course of the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, she was really clear about the fact she's never accepted it. I think her frustration lies in the fact that clearly there are people online who have taken money from political parties and from lobbyists, and that isn't made apparent, or that's like a little tiny small small bit of font at the end of a video. Her argument is that's fine if that's what you want to do, but you need to be really clear about it. So, yeah, that's where she sits with that.
And what about her audience more generally? I think there's a kind of an assumption that it's just younger Australians that are, I guess, tuning into influencers. I know she doesn't like that term, but I guess this new section within the media landscape. But that's not exactly right, is it? Did she give some detail about the demographic that's following her?
I think there's been a lot of blowback from conservative so-called media post the election to say young women are being influenced and that's why they're so progressive, because they're following these progressive commentators online. That's not borne out by her own audience. She gave this quite alarming stat, not alarming, but interesting and unexpected stat, where she said that she has more followers over the age of 60 than she does under the age of 25, which again is very, very different from the broader understanding of who these influencers speak to. As I said, she's clearly found a niche where people feel like they want progressive opinion or partisan opinion that they might not be getting from legacy media.
And we've seen political parties clearly seeing the benefit of, I guess, tapping into these new media sources. What does she think there? Like, does she think there's a risk with, I guess, this greater relationship between politicians and these new forms of media? I mean, we all have relationships with politicians just by virtue of the fact we're in Parliament House. Does she think that there's some hypocrisy there from traditional media on that question? Yeah, she does. She said that the press gallery is really elitist. I find that hard to actually argue with, because there is definitely a bit of a sense of, we earned our place here when you work in this building. Her argument is that we could coexist, that legacy media, people in press gallery can coexist with commentators because we're doing different things, we're serving different purposes. And her biggest concern is that people, politicians, whatever it might be,
they only get their news from one source of information. They become really siloed. They don't get a range of opinions. They don't get a range of views. And her argument is that shouldn't be the case. Like, politicians should be speaking to a broad audience. Commentators should be speaking to a range of views. And we as consumers should also be getting our news from a lot of different sources. And it's really hard to argue with that, actually.
A lot of food for thought there. Thank you so much for your time. It sounds like an interesting speech.
You're very welcome.
It's been a week of leadership battles, with the Greens up next to replace Adam Bandt after he lost his seat of Melbourne at the election. The party room will meet tomorrow to appoint a new leader, and Senators Sarah Hanson-Young, Maureen Faruqi and Larissa Waters are all potential successors. Greens Senator Nick McKim joins us now. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing.
Thanks for having me.
Nick, who are you backing for leader and why?
Look, I'm not going to speculate on, who might get the job or who that I'm backing or who anyone else might be backing. The simple fact is that we've got some terrific MPs in our party room. Adam Bandt made the point that we're all front benchers in the Greens, and whoever comes out of our meeting tomorrow to lead us will do a terrific job, and they'll have the whole team behind them. It's worth pointing out that, unlike the Liberals, there's no real battle over values inside the Greens. We're all completely united on what needs to happen, and that is we need to use our position in the Parliament to hold Labor to account and make Labor act on things like stronger climate action, stopping approving new coal and gas mines, ending native forest logging, addressing cost of living, putting dental into Medicare, building more homes for people. We're all completely united about what we need to do. Our meeting tomorrow will simply decide who's going to lead us while we do that.
I'm curious though, do you have any reflections about what former leader Adam Bandt did get right and then what didn't work and could be improved upon in this term of Parliament?
Well, Adam was a terrific leader for us, and what happened in this election was the country, and we're really happy about this, the country rejected Peter Dutton's hard right, extreme right, Trumpian agenda, and a byproduct of that was that a lot of votes flooded to Labor. I genuinely don't think the vote was a ringing endorsement of Mr Albanese or the Labor Party, but they were the main beneficiary of Australia's rejection of Peter Dutton and everything that he stood for. And a byproduct of that was that our vote in some places in the country did go down a bit, but more importantly, Labor's vote went up, and that allowed Labor to get ahead of us in primaries in some seats, like a couple of our Queensland seats, or in Adam's case, get close enough to Adam that they surfed over the top of us on Liberal preferences. So I genuinely don't think the result was any kind of a reflection on Adam, either as leader or local member. And I will say this about Adam: he got an awful lot right as our leader. He is an amazing human. He was a terrific MP and a terrific leader, and I genuinely hope he's not lost to the party and to the broader movement.
I'm curious though, the Greens did end up with just one seat in the House of Representatives. Is this a sign, do you think, that voters want more pragmatism from politics and not posturing? How do you read that result?
Well, our vote held up pretty well in the House and in the Senate in the face of a significant swing to Labor, and those conditions are traditionally very difficult for us. So I would argue that our vote held up pretty well, given sometimes in politics there are pretty strong tides running, and it doesn't necessarily matter how strong a swimmer you are, the tides simply overwhelm you. And that happens to everyone in politics from time to time. Look, we'll be reviewing this election. We'll be having a close look at the things we did that were in our control, not just in the campaign, but in the Parliament that preceded it. We'll be looking at those external forces, and I've spoken a little bit about some of those today. And once we've landed our review, we'll be in a better position, firstly, to understand what happened, and secondly, to talk about it.
But did you receive sort of any criticism when you were out on the hustings that perhaps the Greens had been too hardline on certain issues and that actually turned voters away?
Well, I didn't personally hear that. I'm not suggesting that that's not how some people felt or that other MPs didn't hear those things. It certainly wasn't something that we heard in Tasmania, where I spent the overwhelming majority of my time. But look, all of these things are absolutely up for discussion, and they should be, because we don't we are not just here to tread water. We are here to do a couple of really critical things, and we are a growing political party and a growing movement in this country. And Labor is abandoning a lot of people.
Senator McKim, I'm so sorry to cut you off. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he's standing up in Perth for a short presser before he heads to Jakarta.
Western Australia some 33 times as Prime Minister in my first term, and I'm starting to click over to 34 now as we go forward. WA is so important. It's an engine room of our national economy. It's a growing state. And I've just met with the Premier, Roger Cook, where we discussed our joint vision when it comes to a future made in WA from his perspective, but a future made in Australia with WA front and centre from my perspective as well. When you look at the transformation of the clean energy economy here in WA as a driver of it, the critical minerals that are here, the capacity that they have for resources, for value adding, is going to continue to drive the national economy. It also is a vibrant state. And here, with the fantastic representatives that I have behind me, I said when I came here, I think in the front page of the West Australian, that I wasn't just about holding the seats that we won in 2022, I was about building on them. And build on them we have, with Moore and Bullwinkle being added to the Labor contingent in the House of Representatives. In addition to that, I want to pay tribute to the candidates who won last time. The fact that Hasluck appears to have been won on primary votes is an extraordinary achievement. You know, someone like Sam Lim, who has turned Tangney into a 57% seat, is extraordinary as well. In addition, of course, our members right across the board campaigned so strongly, and I thank them for it. I do want to give a shout out to Ellie as well, not just as Senator-elect, but the WA campaign here. We have, for the last two elections, run very specific WA campaigns as separate from the national campaign, recognising that there are particular interests here. If you look at the work that we've done on Metronet, the commitments that we've made to the Midland Hospital, the commitments that we've made to increasing ferry service.
And we'll just leave the Prime Minister just there. Now, we're going to discuss the week in just a second. We've got some panel guests who will be coming up shortly. But ultimately, what we were hearing there from the Prime Minister is that he is in Perth. And it is interesting, during the last parliamentary term, he actually visited WA 33 times. So while he hasn't quite got into the meat and potatoes of that press conference just yet, really trying to make a virtue of the fact that he ultimately was happy to be there again, and really discussing the successes that they had on election day in WA, which continues to be a major boost for federal Labor. Now,
and it is so
ultimately
critical.
We do have Labor Senator Marielle Smith, who I believe will be joining us now.
Hi, great to be with you.
Thank you. We just had a few technical difficulties there. Let's just start with WA, because that is where the Prime Minister is ultimately. How important was WA for the Labor Party at the election?
Oh, look, I think the people of Western Australia showed us really incredible support, and we're very humbled by it this election, as we are across the board and across Australia. We have some tremendous local members of Parliament like Sam Lim, who've done a stellar job. And I think what the Prime Minister has shown across the last term, and will continue to show in this government, is that he really wants to be, and he is a Prime Minister for all Australians, not just the eastern coast. I mean, I'm from South Australia. He's been very visible for us here in SA too, and I think that's really important. He's there to govern for all Australians, and is.
Let's bring in Nationals Senator Bridget McKenzie, who I believe is here with us. Yes, it's fantastic. Thanks. Good to see you there. I'll quickly ask you about WA. I was speaking with coalition sources on the morning of the election, and they were pretty confident that they would be picking up seats, but that didn't transpire by the time the polls or the votes started rolling in. Looking ahead, how much of a target will WA be for you at the next election?
Well, great to be with you, Liv. Obviously, WA has to be a significant target. They provide so much of the economic boost to our national economy, and you can't be a serious government, future government, or party of government without holding a number of seats across every single state and territory. And so WA will remain a focus. Obviously, the Liberal Party was able to transition the seat of Forrest to Ben Small from Nola Marino, but WA wasn't the only place where we got a disappointing result, and we're all learning from that and of obviously mapping out a raft of reviews to actually assess what went wrong and how we can put a better proposition, a more joined up proposition to the Australian people come the next election.
Bridget, I might just stick with you for a second and we'll start with the new opposition leadership. So do you think that Sussan Ley is the right person to lead the coalition at this moment in time? You've got the Liberals wound licking, the Nationals appear to be restless. We saw that leadership challenge on Monday, and as one coalition source described it to me, they described the Broadchurch as looking a bit like a bonfire. How do you think Sussan Ley will go as opposition leader?
Look, the Liberal Party's made their decision. They've elected Sussan Ley. She's an incredibly experienced, professional politician, and she's made it clear in her public statements that she is up for the task of rebuilding the Liberal Party, not just at a parliamentary level, but also at an organisational level, which is actually going to be the very difficult task to re-engage with local communities. You know, I think Sussan is going to be a great opposition leader and unite not only her own team but work collaboratively with the National Party going forward, and I think that's exactly what we want to see. This is the first time the Liberal Party have had a female leader. I think we need to applaud them for that. Julie Bishop couldn't get there, and we want to make sure that this is a successful leadership heading into the next election.
Marielle, I'll just bring you in now. There's a theory known as the glass cliff where women are placed in impossible situations. What's your view? Do you think Sussan Ley's been set up to fail?
Look, Sussan Ley's appointment is a matter for the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party room. All I would say is that more broadly speaking, I think it's important that we see and continue to see greater representation of women and people from all sorts of walks of life across our institutions, whether that's our political parties, leadership of boards, government and non-government. So in that sense, I welcome it. But in terms of the nitty-gritty, that's really for the Liberal Party room, which I definitely do not sit in.
And Bridget, what do you think the priority should be for the coalition moving forward? Is it rebuilding trust with voters? Is it overhauling policies or settling some of the tensions that we're hearing about from inside the tent?
Look, when you have a competitive process like leadership spills and people running for leadership positions against each other, that competitive tension isn't necessarily a basis for a broader fallout. I mean, I think it's a false assumption to assume that's the case. So we have seen competitive races for leadership, as there should be. These should be positions that are fought over because they come with great privilege and great responsibility. For the coalition more broadly, we obviously need to settle a coalition agreement that needs to be mutually beneficial for both political parties, the Liberal Party and the National Party. That hasn't been agreed to as yet, so we will see what comes out of those negotiations over coming period. We also need to make sure our organisations do a very deep and honest assessment of what went wrong in the campaign and more broadly how we can do it better. The reality was that Australians didn't flock to the Labor Party. The Labor Party ran a superior campaign, that was obvious, but they also were able to use the preference system in a way that really enhanced their vote in specific seats. And that's been quite a deliberate and successful strategy for them. So on a raft of levels, it's a very humbling defeat. We need to hear that, take that on board, be genuine in that, and have a very honest assessment of not only our policies, but our organisational structures and campaign.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the relationship within the coalition more broadly. Sussan Ley yesterday was saying that the Liberal Party must reflect modern Australia. Bridget, on that point, do you agree? And how does that sit or mesh with a party like the Nationals, which is pitching to a different demographic? It's not to the inner city, it is the regional and rural areas. How do you bridge that ideological gap?
Well, Liv, I would hate to think that we're going to say that regional Australia isn't modern or isn't part of modern Australia. That's the first issue. You are right, the National Party comparatively had a very successful election. We held all our seats, and since 2007 we have been increasingly gaining seats against independents and the Labor Party. We're very clear on who we are, who we represent, and very locally deeply engaged, and we don't make apologies for that. The Liberal Party obviously has had a different trajectory over recent elections, and they need to examine their processes, etc., their policies and their approach. It's not up to me to be critiquing the Liberal Party. I don't like it when people do it to us. It is up to each of us and our political movements to really make sure we are very clear on what we're about, who we want to engage with, and what are the suite of policies that's actually going to deliver for that group of people. And, the Liberal Party is going to have to do that work. We've done it. We've been through that dry gully before, about 15 years ago, and we've been steadily seeing the reward of staying true to that. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We know that the coalition has been the most successful government for our country since it's been around, in the 75 years it's been around, but it has to be fit for purpose, and the Liberal Party needs to undertake that work themselves, and I'm not going to sort of give them pointers on that. That'd be rude.
And I take that point from you, Bridget. Of course, the regions and modern Australia as well. That was clumsily worded of me. But
Thank you.
Marielle, Labor often points to its quotas as proof you can deliver both diversity and talent. You've hit gender parity again, but you've also just lost Ed Husic and Mark Dreyfus, not due to merit, but through factional deals. Does that risk undermining the case for balance if experience gets pushed aside, Marielle?
Well, look, first of all, I'd say, yes, we do have quotas. We have affirmative action, and I've been a very proud and long advocate of those processes and rule changes in our party, because I think they've made a really big difference. And you see now the first majority female cabinet we've ever had. We've got a ministry which has equal representation of women and a majority woman government. And when you have policies like that and you see women take up those positions, you see policy change. We took a tremendous women's health policy to this election of an $800 million investment in women's health, which is very well received by the community. And we've also been able to roll out paid parental leave, family and domestic violence leave, and a whole other range of policies which happened because we had women at the decision-making table. Of course, we have internal democratic processes as well, and I very much understand the deep disappointment many feel in those. But I am confident we've got a fantastic team. We're united behind Anthony, our leader, and we've got a big agenda to fulfil, and we'll humbly go about doing that.
Liv, can I add something here? I look forward to the Labor Party power brokers being called faceless women, because that's when we know that the Labor Party, the power within the Labor Party, that who makes these sort of decisions, is actually sitting with women in the Labor Party, and not that the women of the Labor Party are the front four where the power really sits, which is the faceless men behind them, the factions, if you like. So that's when I know the Labor Party will have actually turned the corner on gender equality, when the people that hold the power can also wear a dress.
Well, that is extremely offensive. Extremely offensive, and it was
name one
colleagues
power
from
broker that's
Bridget's
a woman.
side of the parliament who, when I was elected and sworn in, yelled out chants of "quota girl" to me. I will proudly hold my CV up to anyone else on the floor of the Senate. That is ridiculous and offensive.
Well, you know what? Tanya Plibersek should be leading your party. What happened to Tanya?
This is very rude and very offensive.
Marielle, I will ask Labor's message, I should say, more broadly on women was a lot stronger going into the election. There's no doubt about that. But I did notice of the 12 assistant ministry positions which Albanese picked himself, only 4 went to women. Why is that? And was that a move closely watched from within the party?
Look, those decisions are made by the Prime Minister. I respect the Prime Minister and I respect his decisions. But what you've seen in our party over many years is a deliberate desire and a deliberate attempt to change the structures in our party to deliver more women into decision-making positions. Those structures, those rule changes have worked. As a Senator, as a factional convener in my own state of South Australia and as one of the Vice Presidents of my branch, I'm very committed to those values and very committed to those rule changes because they work. And I will proudly hold our record up. I will proudly hold Anthony's record up as someone who has championed gender equality, and we will continue to do that as leaders.
Bridget, on this point, if the Liberal front bench and indeed the coalition front bench continues to be dominated by men, is it time to admit the system's broken and that quotas might be the only fix? What's your view?
Not at all. I'd put any one of my female senators or my female shadow cabinet colleagues against any single man or woman on the government side. I lead a highly successful Senate team in the National Party, majority woman, sent by our divisions. Our shadow cabinet at the last election for the National Party was dominated by females. So I really don't buy the stereotype that Marielle and her colleagues continue to peddle, that somehow we're anti-women on the coalition side, because the facts simply don't bear out. The Liberal Party has just elected a female leader of a party of government, and we need to be celebrating that. And she had to get a lot of guys to vote for her too. It just wasn't the ladies. So I think we need to see our parliament as places of diversity, as you were saying, Olivia, not just about gender or sex, but actually about cultural diversity as well. Instead of, having working class Australians here, not all grammarians from GO8 universities, would lead to a lot of diversity as well. So there's a whole lot of conversations, not just about women, about reflecting all the diversity of our great country here in Parliament.
I think when it comes to gender diversity, though, the proof is in the statistics, isn't it? We have a majority female government. We have a cabinet which is 50-50. And when you look at representation in the Liberal Party in particular, those percentages are measured in the 20s and 30s. Now, it's up to those parties and those institutions to make their own decisions. But I'm proud of the decisions we made when it came to affirmative action. I don't believe affirmative action required us to lower any of our standards. I think it required us to raise them. We've seen great women in our movement, great leaders. I'm really proud of that. And the statistics, when it comes to the coalition, both in terms of the women representing them and the numbers of women representing them, and in the policies they take forward to the election, quite frankly, speak for themselves.
Bridget, I will just ask you on this. I know you're in the Nationals and not the Liberal Party, but heading into the election, speaking with senior Liberal sources, they could see that female voters were moving away from the coalition. It started really with the Trump inauguration, but it continued to drop off from then, especially around that working from home backflip. Did that kind of frustrate you? And what's your message, I guess, to the senior coalition partner, the Liberals, when it comes to improving representation? Because no matter which way you cut it, the representation is not where it needs to be.
Well, Olivia, we don't have quotas in the National Party, and I don't think we ever will. That what the Liberal Party does with getting more women involved is up to them. The reality is our Senate leader, Michaelia Cash, is a female. Anne Ruston is also on the leadership team, Sussan Ley, etc., myself, and others. So to sort of say there hasn't been females around the leadership table in decision-making positions incorrect, and we also had similar numbers in our shadow cabinet to the cabinet that went to the election. The reality, though, around policy development, to assume that women vote for women, or that women only want to see a women's the type of policy the Labor Party brought to the table is incorrect. Women also fill up the car every day. They're also on the front line of the cost of living crisis. They're the ones actually putting stuff back in the shopping and being embarrassed that they can't afford it, or paying the bills and not being able to afford the kids' soccer this term. They're on the front line of that. So they were very Dutton curious, as we know, heading into the election. And the work from home policy did hurt us with that cohort, because women were the ones having to take the second job to actually get the mortgage paid and get the bills paid, and flexibility in the workplace did allow them to balance family responsibilities with dealing with the cost of living crisis. And I think, you know, it's no secret that policy was the wrong policy, which is why we admitted that and you know, no longer took it forward. That was the right decision. And, you know, I've got nothing more to say with that. I think there'll be a review into the election more broadly, and that'll be discussed and dissected always, and we'll actually have some data to back up those decisions. And until I sort of see that at a very granular level, that's what I've got to say about the work from home policy.
Marielle Smith and Bridget McKenzie, thanks so much for joining me today. The topic of women in politics is such a hotly contested debate. We do need more women in politics. Yes, we absolutely can. And thank you so much for bearing with us with those technical difficulties at the start. We got there in the end. Let's go now back to Perth, where the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was taking questions from journalists a short time ago.
Well, it's important in our own interest, but also in the interests of the region, that we have a strong with Indonesia. That's why when elected Prime Minister, the first country I had a bilateral with was Indonesia, and this time in my second term, once again, I'm returning to Indonesia as the first port of call, because there's no more important relationship than we have with Indonesia.
The election campaign's over now. You know, we've gone past what Peter Dutton said about Mr. Bobo and Russia. So I'm just wondering if you can tell us now, what was the Australian government's understanding of Russia's request, and you know, what was your message to Indonesia?
Well, we have a good relationship with Indonesia. Indonesia made the position very clear. That was understood by just about everyone. I know that for some there was a great deal of interest that pretended that history didn't occur there. Indonesia is a sovereign nation, but they made it very clear that the position that was reported and that Mr. Dutton spoke about just wasn't the case. And the verbling of the Indonesian president is not a good idea by anyone in a senior position in Australia.
There wasn't a request of any sort?
No, I've maintained my previous comments, and you know, they've all been there, and the Australian can continue to report on something that isn't happening if you wish, but the truth is it's not happening, and everyone senior in the Indonesian government at the time said it wasn't happening, and I find it just a bit passing strange that I continue to be asked about something that is not happening.
Prime Minister, have you read Roger Cook's post-election letter that he sent you, and did you today offer him any time frame for the 10 priorities that he listed in that letter, topped by his wish to make GST top-up arrangements permanent?
Oh, look, we had a preliminary discussion about all of those issues today. I certainly did receive the letter from Roger Cook, as I did from other premiers as well. And there's nothing unusual about premiers putting forward the interests of their states. I expect Roger to continue to do that, as I expect other premiers and chief ministers
Did you agree with time frame?
to.
Real wages are up. Does that put the chance of a rate cut next week at risk?
Real wages going up is a good thing, 5 quarters in a row, and it stands in stark contrast with what was happening before we came to government, where real wages fell as a conscious decision of the economic architecture of the Liberal Party when they were in government. We think that cost of living pressures are real. One way that you do that is by increasing people's wages. Another way you do it is by decreasing people's taxes. We're doing both of those. And at the election campaign, this was one of the big issues and the big distinctions between us. Yeah.
So the North West Shelf decision, when can we expect a ruling on whether or not that's going?
I expect a ruling in accordance with the law, and that is what occurs. Murray Watt's only been appointed yesterday, so I'm sure he'll receive briefings, and the EPBC Act applies, and that will be considered.
The state government has called for that to be done as soon as possible, and it's gone past that initial deadline. Would you like to see it done as his first act as minister?
I'd like to see it done in accordance with the law, is what I would like to see occur. And the state government considered it over a long period of time. This is an issue that's relevant for the 2030s, which is when it's due to commence. But Murray Watt will, I'm sure, be briefed on it, and as is appropriate, and the law will apply.
Murray Watt, just getting...
That was Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in Perth. He was making a whistle-stop visit to WA before he heads to Jakarta this evening to meet with Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto. Now, let's move back to domestic politics. One of the winners in the frontbench reshuffle this week was the member for Macnamara, Josh Burns. He joins us now. Josh, congratulations is in order for your appointment as Special Envoy for Social Housing and Homelessness. What do you see as your top priorities, I should say, in the role?
Oh, good afternoon, Liv, and thanks for having me on the show. I mean, this is one of the most important areas of government where we are building homes for people who need it. And last election, Australians voted for a party that was finally going to get back in the game of building social housing. The work that was done to roll out the Housing Australia Future Fund was, frankly, the work that should have been done for the decade prior. But finally, we have a federal government that's willing to invest in social housing. And you know, I'm really excited to work with Claire O'Neill, our outstanding housing minister, and to help work on the policies that's going to help people have that safety and security of having their own home. So there is a big policy agenda, and there's thousands of homes that are being built, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
I know you're fresh into this role, but housing was just such a crucial policy platform for Labor over the course of the campaign. I spent a week with Anthony Albanese, and most days we were visiting a concrete slab in an outer metropolitan suburb, especially to spruik Labor's promise to help first home buyers into the market with a 5% deposit scheme, and also that commitment to build 100,000 new homes over 8 years. Have you had a chance to speak with Claire O'Neill yet and been given any indication of how quickly those promises will progress?
Well, I've spoken to Claire, obviously, and it was a conversation I won't forget. It was really exciting, and we're both really focused on this policy area. Obviously, there is a huge agenda, as you just outlined, to not only help people get into the housing market with a 5% deposit and guarantee that purchase so that people don't have to pay lenders' mortgage insurance, but also to create a whole network and industry of housing where first home buyers aren't going to be competing with investors and property developers. So this is a big agenda, and I've only been in the job a couple of days, and obviously the Minister, Claire O'Neill, will be taking lead of all of this, and I'm looking forward to supporting her in whichever way possible so that we can get this done as quickly as possible.
She did mention during the campaign that she'd be on the phone to the states and territories pretty early on under a re-elected government and eke out agreements to free up land for some of those homes. You wouldn't happen to know if that's taken place yet, would you?
I'm not sure. You'd have to speak to my boss there, Olivia. But no, I know that Claire is. She's obviously been in the role prior to the election. This is something that she's really passionate about. She worked so hard to help develop the policies, and I think it's fantastic that she's going to be in a position where there's continuity and she'll be able to oversee this massive agenda. And yeah, I'm feeling really privileged to be a part of the team.
You'll have oversight over social housing and homelessness more specifically. Do you have any key ambitions of what you'd like to achieve in that role?
Well, look, every home that we build, Liv, is a home for a person and for an individual who really needs it. And whether it's the circumstances of young people or older people who are finding themselves in difficult circumstances, what I want to see is more homes being built, and and you know, and I know the impact that that has on individuals. I know how it changes lives, and having that stability and certainty that you've got a safe place to come home to is the absolute foundation for any successful life. So what I'm looking forward to really contributing in is how, you know, how do we ensure that we can build as many homes as possible, and we have set out a huge agenda, and there's a lot of work to do.
We've seen a shake-up of special envoys within the government, and among them we've seen your new role created, but also the special envoy for social cohesion role scrapped. Given the tensions we've seen both globally and locally, do you see that as a step backwards?
Oh, not at all. I mean, there's certainly a number of portfolios that will be covering the work that Peter Khalil did, and he did an outstanding job. I mean, he you know, his seat almost was an epicentre of how difficult it's been for social cohesion in the last 3 years, and Peter is someone who, you know, who always acted respectfully and thoughtfully, and you know, I'm a great admirer of his. And I think that work is going to be taken up by people right across the government, not just those in ministerial positions, but obviously in portfolios like multicultural affairs. That sort of work around engaging with people from different parts of the country is going to continue. And you know, we want everyone in Australia to feel like they're a part of it, to feel confident, to feel, you know, to feel like this is the country that they belong to. And I think it has been a difficult few years, but hopefully everyone, and this election gives everyone a chance to just take a big deep breath and realise that we are all Australians, that we want to live peacefully. And you know, Liv, I had thousands of conversations with people in my community over the last couple of months, and everyone, you know, everyone was just so nice and so considerate and so thoughtful and respectful. And you know, I feel really privileged to be in this country, and I think that we are on the stead of hopefully, you know, just having that Australia that we all know and love, which is one of harmony and respect, and people can practice who they are and be whoever they are, no matter what.
We did just see, though, the most senior Jewish member of Labor's cabinet, Mark Dreyfus, being booted from the front bench. Do you worry that some in the Jewish community might feel less represented as a result of that? And does that, I guess, risk weakening the government's ability to engage meaningfully with the Jewish community?
Oh, look, let me just say this about Mark Dreyfus. I mean, I really admire Mark. He's an amazing person. He oversaw really complicated reform in the last parliament, including the Family Law Act, and also introducing and setting up the National Anti-Corruption Commission. You know, personally, I worked with him on some key pieces of legislation, including the anti-doxing laws that obviously didn't just affect the Jewish community, but we know that the primary target of doxing on the internet is women, and the overall numbers of women who are doxed online is just extraordinary and frightening. Mark was key and got that through the parliament, and obviously, you know, he introduced the laws that criminalise violent hate speech. So I think Mark has done an outstanding job. He's someone who's deeply respected. I know he's got a lot more to give, and you know, and on engagement with the Jewish community, you know, I've already been speaking to senior members of the community, and everyone is looking forward to working together, to, you know, leading through the next period and working constructively, and I'm sure that that's going to occur.
In 10 seconds, if you could, this is a hard question to answer quickly, but have you heard any feedback from the Jewish community about the PM's decision to have both the Attorney General and Home Affairs Minister cross-sworn into ASIO and the AFP? No,
in 10 seconds I haven't, but I'm sure Tony Burke will do an outstanding job.
Okay, that's good to know. So no suggestion there that those machinery of government changes was a good thing?
I haven't had any feedback, but I know Tony's, you know, someone who's got great experience across government. I work closely with him on a number of areas, and I know he's a steady hand, and he'll
Thanks for that,
manage this well. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. Congratulations again on the new role. That's afternoon briefing for today. Stay with us here on ABC News. Joe O'Brien is up next. See you soon.